1S5, Topic 5, Ordering Fractions, Decimals, and Percents. This is the instructional video for your notes, so make sure you're filling in the notes and examples as you go. As we get started with ordering, we need to make sure we remember some of the vocabulary. So we can order fractions, decimals, and percents in two ways. We can order them least to greatest, which is also known as ascending order. Or we can order them greatest to least. Also known as descending order. So you can order fractions, decimals, and percents by following the following steps. Step 1, read the problem. Least to greatest, greatest to least, ascending or descending. What is the problem asking you to do? Make sure you order your values in that order or your answer will be wrong. Step 2 is you want to change everything to percents. It's just the easiest way to make sure that you are comparing the same thing. And percents are easiest to order because you don't have to worry about place value or common denominators. And then step 3, after you've changed them to percents and figured out which order they go in, you need to write them in the original form.
Just like many topics in math, one of the best ways to understand it is to practice it. So example A says, order the following fractions, decimals, and percents from least to greatest. So the first thing that we have in our notes to do for step 1 is to read the problem and identify the order. So this asks for us to order from least to greatest. So that means my least value will be listed first on the left-hand side, and the greatest value will be listed last on the right-hand side. The next thing we need to do is convert all of our values into percent form. So I'm looking at ordering the values 6%, 2/3, 0.68, and 0.6. My first value, 6%, is already in percent form. So I can simply carry that down to that bottom row and rewrite it, 6%. The next value, 2/3, is a fraction. I need to first convert that fraction to a decimal and then the decimal to a percent. So 2/3 is one of those fractions that we said is easiest to just memorize. It's a repeating decimal, and there's only a couple fractions that are thirds, 1/3 or 2/3, so memorizing it is the easiest. So I can rewrite the fraction first of all in this fraction row, but as a decimal, that is 0.6 repeating. Now, the only thing you have to be careful of is when you convert that decimal to a percent, I have to remember that there are repeating sixes that follow after the one that I've written. So that is 0.666666, and it keeps repeating. So when I move my decimal point to convert it into a percent, it becomes 66.6 repeating percent. Close to 67%. A lot of times you may hear people talk about 2/3 and say 67%. If they say that, they're rounding. But this is the most accurate way to write it. So I'm going to write 66.6 repeating percent. Now the last two are decimals, so those are pretty simple, right? I can skip the fraction portion, I can rewrite the decimal, and for both of these, I'm just going to move my decimal point 2 places. So for the first one, I have 0.68. I move my decimal point 2 places and rewrite it, so that is 68%. That's what I'll write in the box here. And for the last one, I can skip the fraction portion, rewrite the decimal. And I just have to be careful that when I convert this to a percent, that I keep track of making sure I still move my decimal 2 places, even if there's not 2 digits. So 0.6, I'm moving my decimal point 1, 2 places, and it ends up over there at the end. If I don't have something to jump around, I insert a 0 as a placeholder. So that becomes 60%. So then I'll write that in the box. Now I have to order them. So sometimes it's easiest to place the values kind of next to the numbers we have as percentages, and then we can put them in the original form for my answer. So of course, the smallest number, I'm going from least to greatest, the smallest number is going to simply be that 6%, right? So I can write that right away. And its original form was 6%. Now I'm looking at the other percentages. I have 66.6 repeating percent, 68%, or 60%. So the next smallest value, going from least to greatest, would be that 60%. And I'm going to put it in its original form, which is 0.6. Then I would have the 66.6 repeating percent. Its original form was 2/3. And the greatest value that I would list last is that 68%. Its original form was 0.68. So I will write that in its original form in the last blank. So I have looked at how I've read the problem and looked at how I need to order them. I have converted everything to percents. And then when I listed them in order, I listed them in their original form. So we're going to look below the problem that we just worked on. We're going to look at example B. It says order the following fractions, decimals, and percents in descending order. So we want to pay attention to descending. Descending means the numbers are going down or descending in value. So that means I'm listing my values from greatest to least. So when I write my answers down below, my greatest value will be listed first and my least value will be listed last. Now I'm going to kind of break out of the mold for just a moment, and I want you to, of our steps that we're going to go through, and I want you to pay attention to something important. So my values I have that I'm ordering are 9/10, -0.009, -9%, and 1 3/8. One of those values should jump out at you because it's not like the others. One of those values is greater than 1 whole. And that is the last one, 1 3/8. So that whole number in front of that fraction, creating the mixed number, is telling me that that number is more than 1. It's more than 1 whole. So that means, now I will take the time to show you how to convert that into the percentage that it needs to be converted into. But right away, I know that that is my biggest value because it's more than 1 whole. So I'm going to go ahead and list that down below, but I want you to kind of hone in on some stuff like that. For example, if there's only one negative number, you know it has to be the least value. I will practice with you how to convert to make sure you are comfortable with that. Because again, these little tricks about which is more than a whole or which is negative, it depends on what your other values are you're ordering as to whether it's super helpful. In this case, the fact that this is the only one that's more than a whole can help you list it. So 1 3/8 is going to be my first value listed because it's the greatest. Now I will go ahead and show you how to convert that into a percent. Of course, as a fraction, you could make it an improper fraction, but honestly, with what we're doing in this unit, it's easiest to keep it as a mixed number. There are some units where we would prefer to have improper fractions, like multiplying and dividing fractions. But right now, keeping a mixed number is just fine. Now, what I will pay attention to is the fact that 1 whole, so that is like 100%, or that would be the whole number in front of the decimal. And then I'm just looking at that 3/8 to figure out what that decimal part is, or the part that comes after the decimal. So 3/8, that's where we had our little 2575, 2575, right, for our odd numerators of eighths. 1/8 was the first one, so that ended in 25. and 3/8 is the second one, so that ended in 7/5. So I know it ends in 7/5, and what comes in the tens place before that is the numerator. So 0.375 is the 3/8 portion, but you keep your 1 as your whole number in front of it. So when I write this as a decimal, it'll be 1.375. I'll move my decimal point 2 places, and that will turn this into, so it moves over 2 places, and that will turn this into 137.5%. So again, this will be the only value that has a percentage greater than 100. All right, now I'm going to go back and work on those other 3 values. So I had 9/10. Of course, as a fraction, it is 9/10. As a decimal, this was pretty simple because if you can say it, you can write it, because tenths is one of the place values. So all you do is put a 9 in the tenths place. Now, when you're converting this to a percent, so you have 0.9 and you move your decimal point 2 places, remember you have to insert a 0 as a placeholder, and that will become 90%. So that's what I will write in the box here. All right, then I have my 2 negative numbers. So of course it would make sense that my only other positive number be listed next. I only had 2 positive numbers. One was greater than 1 whole. The next one is the only other positive number, so that 9/10 in its original form would be listed next. And then I'm looking at my 2 negative values to figure out their order. So I've used a little bit of common sense in terms of what stands out from the others, what's positive, what's negative, to help me with ordering, and maybe not to have to spend as much time agonizing over this problem. So I'm left with negative 0.009 and negative 9%. Negative 9% is, of course, already in percent form, so I can simply carry it down to that last row, negative 9%. And negative 0.009, again, I can move my decimal point 2 places to the right when I want to change this to a percent. I'm, of course, skipping fraction, writing it as it is in that decimal column or decimal row, and then moving my decimal 2 places to the right, and I end up with negative. The decimal point goes in front of the 9, so negative 0.9%. So there is a difference between these two. I have negative 0.9% and negative 9%. So when I order these, I've already done the first two. The 1 3/8, of course, was listed first. Then I had the 9/10 or 90%. And now I'm looking at these last two. I was going from greatest to least with these. So again, with negatives, the one that is the least negative is the greater number. So negative 0.9% is less negative than negative 9%. So that one would be listed first. So its original form was negative 0.009. And then my least value is the negative 9%, and that was in its original form. Sometimes it gets a little tricky with those negatives, but this is where we had some practice with ordering our integers to make sure we know where they appear on the number line, so we know which values are greater or less than the others. So we made sure to read the problem and decide which way we were ordering them. We converted our values to percents. Again, there were a couple I could have done without converting them to percents because they were positive or they stood out as being more than a whole. And then those last two didn't take very long. One was already in percent form. I just had to move the decimal point for the other one. Now I'm going back up to that right column now, kind of across from A that I did originally, and I'm looking at example C. It says to order the following fractions, decimals, and percents in ascending order. So this is where I have to know what ascending means. Ascending means my numbers go up in value, so that means I'm ordering from least to greatest. So So I'll write a little note for myself down below to make sure I put them in the correct order. Now I'm going to place these values in percent form. One of them should jump out at me again. Like last time, I have one number that is greater than the rest. So depending on, and that's rather greater than one whole. So that should stand out depending on which way I'm ordering things. It's either the first one or the last one. In this case, since I'm ordering least to greatest and it's greater than one whole, that would be the last number that I would have listed. But again, we will go through figuring out how to make sure we convert everything. Now, of course, this one is easy to convert to a percent. It's already in percent form, so I would just carry it down. 187%. And again, since we're listing least to greatest, and it's the only one more than a whole, that would be listed last. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in that last blank now and save myself a little trouble. As I continue ordering least to greatest, there's something else that should jump out at me. Of the 3 remaining numbers, 2 of them are negative. So I know that one of these numbers is going to be bigger than the other 2 because it's positive. So the 7/8 is the only other positive number. So I know that has to be the next biggest number, basically, the one that goes in the third blank. Now, 7/8, we want to make sure to review how to convert that because this is one of our eighths that has one of the tricks. So you have to remember 2575, 2575. Because this is more than half, you're adding 1 to the numerator when you write your decimal. So 7/8, of course, is the fraction as a decimal. Instead of a 7 in the tens place, you add 1 to make an 8. And 7/8 is the last fraction that we listed, so it ends in 75. You had 2575, 2575, so 0.875. I then move my decimal point 2 places, and it becomes 87.5%. Now looking at my other 2 values that are both negative, they are both decimals. So for both of these, I will skip over the fraction portion, carry down the decimals, so negative 0.857 and negative 0.8. And for both of them, I have to move my decimal 2 places to the right. So 1, 2, it ends there in between the 5 and the 7. So when I write my percent, I have negative 85.7%. And when I move this one on the right here, again, if I don't have enough digits, I have to use a 0 as a placeholder. So I wind up with negative 80%. So I've already decided that the 187% is the fourth one or the last one listed. And the other positive number, 7/8, is the third one listed. I have to look at the other 2. So I'm going least to greatest. I have negatives for the remaining 2 options. So the most negative is going to be the least. So negative 85.7% is the first number I'm listing because it is the most negative. Its original form is negative 0.857. And then the one that goes in the middle here, the other negative number, but not as negative, the negative 80%, or in its original form, was negative 0.8. So I have all my values listed, least to greatest. I made sure to put them in the correct order. I converted my values to percents, but I also used some logic along the way to recognize that for some of them, I maybe didn't have to convert them in order to order them. If it was more than a whole and it was the only one that was more than a whole, I knew it was the biggest one. And again, looking at my values in terms of which is negative and which is positive, that can also help me as well. And example D. Order the following fractions, decimals, and percents from greatest to least. So this is what I'm paying attention to here is the order that I'm going to list them. My greatest value will be listed first. My least value will be listed last. So I'm looking at 1/4, 0.2, 2%, and 2 1/6. Right away, there's a value that jumps out at me because it is the only value that is greater than one whole. and that is 2 1/6. And I know it's greater than 1 whole because of that whole number that is in front of the fraction. Now, if I had multiple values that were greater than 1 whole, it might not jump out at me as much because it wouldn't be the only one of its kind. But in this case, it is. So it's greater than 1 whole. So that means I will be listing this one first because it's definitely the greatest value. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down below with my answer. Now we're going to work through solving this, turning this into a percent. For my fraction, I just carry it down, of course. And then to change it to a decimal, my whole number stays in front of the decimal point, and then I convert the 1/6 portion to a decimal. This is one you probably want to memorize, or you'll have to use long division. It is a repeating decimal, and when we practiced this in class, I told you that both the numerator and denominator that you see in the fraction also appear in the decimal. So the fraction part would convert to 0.16 with that 6 only repeating. So you include the whole number and it's 2.16 repeating. Now, when I turn this into a percent, I move my decimal point 2 places to the right, so it would end up going after the 6. The only thing you have to be careful of is you have to remember that there are other 6's that continue on after this. So 216.6 repeating percent. So you can't forget that there are other 6's that would appear after that decimal point because that 6 is what continues to repeat. And as we said, this is the only number greater than a whole, so that is the number I was listing first in when I list them greatest to least. All right, so now for my other values. I'm going to convert each of these. I don't have to worry about negatives, so some of the other problems I could look at which ones might be greatest or least based on negatives. Everything left is positive. So again, I'm going to convert to percents. So 1/4, I'm going to just rewrite that fraction as a decimal. We talked about money, quarters, how many cents are in a quarter. So 0.25 is the decimal, or 25%. 0.2, I move my decimal point 2 places after I carry down my decimal here. So 0.2, I move my decimal point 2 places to the right. And remember, if I don't have a place or a number to jump around, then I would put a 0 as a placeholder. So this becomes 20%, and 2% simply gets carried down. It's already in percent form. All right. So we said our biggest value that's listed first was that 2 1/6. My next greatest value would be that 25%. And its original form was 1/4. I almost messed up and put the percent there. You want to write it in its original form. Then I would have 20%. Its original form is 0.2. And my least is 2%, and that was its original form. So I've listed my values, greatest to least. As we go down to the practice problems at the bottom of the page, there's really like 4 problems. There's an A and a B for each problem. And what you want to do is pause the video, give yourself time to order these in the order that it says, so pay attention to your vocabulary. You're going to convert everything to percents to figure out the order and list them in the original form. So you're going to pause the video, do both A and B for practice question 1. Then you'll resume it and check your answers. You might want to do this in pencil since this is going in your notebook in case you make a mistake, or do it on scrap paper or on your whiteboard that we've created for your binder until we've checked it, just to make sure you don't have to cross out a bunch of things in your notebook. So go ahead and pause the video, do both A and B for practice problem 1, and then you'll resume it shortly to check your answers. All right, so we're going to check both of these problems now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have a little space over to the right here, and you may have done it on scrap paper or on your whiteboard, is I want to convert each of these values in A. I want to convert to a percent. So I'm looking at negative 1.8. I have negative 4/5. I have negative 185%. and I have negative 0.81. So negative 1.8, when I move my decimal point 2 places, becomes negative 180%. Negative 4/5, well, 4/5 is 0.8 or 80%, so I keep the negative sign, and so that's negative 80%. Negative 185% does not change. It's already in percent form. And negative 0.81, when I move the decimal point, is negative 81%. So I am listing these values in descending order. That means greatest to least. So where I've listed these percent equivalencies over to the side, remember these are negatives, so sometimes you have to stop and think about these negatives. The number that's the greatest, because these are negatives, is the one that's the least negative. So my least negative number is the negative 80%. That's the least negative, so that's the greatest. And that was negative 4/5. Then my next least negative number would be negative 81%. It's a little bit more negative because it would be a little bit farther to the left on the number line. Its original form was negative 0.81. Then I would reach negative 180%. That would be my third one. Its original form is negative 1.8. And the most negative number, meaning the least in value, is the negative 185%, and that was in its original form. All right, and B. I am looking at 4/9, 140%, 0.4, and 3/5. And I'm going to convert each of these to percents. So 4/9 was one of those repeating decimals, right? The numerator repeats. So 0.4 repeats. So when I move my decimal point, it's 44.4 repeating percent. 140% is the same. 0.4, I move my decimal point, becomes 40%. And 3/5, we use our hand stroke for fifths. So that is 0.6 or 60%. So again, I'm still going in descending order, greatest to least. At least this time we're dealing with positive numbers. So my greatest value would of course be 140%. Its original form was 140%. Next, I would have 60%. Its original form was 3/5. Then I would have 44.4%. Its original form was 4/9. And my least number, the fourth one listed here, would be 40% or 0.4 in its original form. So check over those. Hopefully you got all of those correct. And if you missed one of them, check how you converted to the percent to make sure that you did not make a mistake in converting. Or maybe you listed in the wrong order. So pay attention to what you're missing so you don't continue to miss things. Now we're going to do the same thing with practice problem number 2. You're going to order both A and B. It says in ascending order this time, so be careful with your vocabulary. You want to pause the video to work through ordering these on your own on scrap paper or on your whiteboard, and then you will press play again to resume and check your answers. All right, so we're going to go ahead and check A. So I'm going to convert each of these to percent, and we said we're going in ascending order, so that is least to greatest. So my first value I'm looking at is negative 2.6 repeating. We will make that into a percent. We have negative 2/3, we have to convert to a percent. We have 66.6%, and we have 7/10. So negative 2.6 repeating, we have to move our decimal point 2 places. So you have to be careful and remember that there are other 6's that are after the 6 we have. So this would be negative 200 and 66.6 repeating percent. Negative 2/3. 2/3 is 0.6 repeating, or 66.6 repeating percent. I keep my negative sign. So negative 66.6 repeating percent. Lots of sixes with this. Then I have 66%. Nothing is repeating here, and it's already in percent form. And 7/10. Of course, we think about our place value here. So 0.7, which equals 70%. So going from least to greatest, I am going to list, of course, my negative numbers first would be least, and the one that's the most negative, it has the least value. So negative 266.6 repeating percent is the most negative. That's what I'm going to list first. Its original form is negative 2.6 repeating. Then I have my other negative number. So negative 66.6 repeating percent is negative 2/3. Then I have my 66%, and that was its original form. And then I have my 70%, which its original form was 7/10. So this was actually already in ascending order. We wouldn't have known that until we converted everything to percents, but everything is in the same order as it was originally. And going on to B. So I have 0.24. I have 25%. I have 0.251, and I have 1/5. So I move the decimal point for 0.24. That becomes 24%. 25% is already in percent form. I move my decimal point for 0.251, and it's 25.1%. And 1/5 is 20%. So I'm ordering in ascending order from least to greatest. So the least would be 20%. So that's the first one I'm going to list. Its original form was 1/5. Then I have 24%. So its original form was in a decimal form, 0.24. Now I have 25% and 25.1%. 25% is slightly less than 25.1%. So that would be listed third. It was originally 25%. And my greatest value is 25.1%. That's listed last. That was a decimal, 0.251. So there you have it. Check your answers. If you had them correct, make sure you can go ahead and write them now in the blanks on your paper so that you have the examples written in your notebook and have them written correctly.